Alright, gather round folks, because this isn't just a story. It's a tell-all that's gonna shake up everything you thought you knew about high society in the Hamptons. Meet Barbara Barb Sterling, 68. Always flaunted as the crown jewel of her millionaire hubby's empire. But behind the chandeliers of their beach mansion, she was shackled by invisible chains of control and silence. From charity galas to exclusive country club mixers, this grandma discovered that courage ain't got an age limit, and freedom can sometimes cost you a yacht auctioned off in the middle of a nor'easter. Buckle up, because every minute from here on out will have you hooked until the last note of this incredible comeback. If this story tugs at your heartstrings, smash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Your voice makes all the difference. We're all ears, Barb, because this memory deserves to be told and experienced right along with you.
Thank you so much for giving me this chance to spill my guts in public. Well, I hope you've got time to listen to this old broad story. I'm 68 years old. You know, I've got so much bottled up inside. Memories that sometimes hurt to revisit, but I need to set them free. What a relief to have you all here to listen. These years have shaped me into the woman I am today, broken me down and built me back up again. There have been dark days, endless nights. Get ready, honey. This ain't an easy story to swallow. It's about how I discovered that even the shiniest jewels can hide deep cracks. So, here we go. At this one fancy event at the country club, my husband Richard's toast rang out like victory bells across the room. He said, "To my wife, Barbara Sterling, who at 68 is still the jewel that makes my empire shine." He raised my hand as the Hamptons elite applauded. I smiled like I always did. Smiled for the cameras, for the guests, for the waiters, floating around with glasses of champagne. The moment we stepped behind the velvet curtains, his voice turned from silk to steel. "Stand up straight, Bob. That smile of yours is drawing way too much attention." The scent of gardenias hanging in the air couldn't mask the smell of something being off. And that's when the year began, where I discovered that all that glitters ain't gold. I was born in 56, in a house with big windows in Greenwich overlooking the Long Island Sound. My dad, a university professor of literature, filled our house with books and heated debates about Hemingway. My mom, a frustrated pianist, took out the talent she never got to express on the big stage on us kids. "Barbara, sit up straight. A lady doesn't cross her legs like that. Barbara, that way you talk scares the boys away. Barbara, those paintings are too bold for a girl from a good family." New York, in the 60s and 70s, was boiling with new ideas while I was suffocating under old rules. I would escape to my makeshift studio in the basement, where my watercolors captured the sea I saw from the window but could never explore alone. I became an art teacher, going against my dad's wish for me to be a lawyer. "Art doesn't pay the bills, girl," he would repeat between sips of black coffee. I met Richard at an art opening at MoMA. He was 10 years older, already established as a luxury importer, with silver streaks at his temples that gave him an air of distinction. He approached my canvas, a yellow maple against a blue sky, and said, "I like someone who knows how to capture the American spirit without being cliché." We got married 6 months later, to the relief of my family, who saw Richard as the catch that I, at 32, was running the risk of not finding anymore. The first few years were dazzling. International trips, dinners with ambassadors, my name in the society pages. We built a family. Our son, Jake, was born when I was 34. I set up my studio on the penthouse floor of our apartment in Manhattan. Richard seemed proud. "My wife, the artist," he would say to friends. Although he always added, "It's a lovely hobby." I swallowed the belittling with a smile. Over time, his admiration turned into control. First, there were subtle suggestions about my clothes, then opinions about which friendships were appropriate. When I took a teaching position at the most prestigious school on the Upper East Side, Richard insisted on picking me up every day. "It's not safe to walk alone, Barb," he would justify, ignoring that I was born and raised on those streets. Little by little, I became the perfect shadow to his shine. At parties, I knew exactly when to smile, when to serve a drink, when to praise. It's an important contact. Jake grew up watching this silent ballet, and now, at 36, he is replicating the same pattern with his own wife, even though I tried to show him another way. I retired at 60, hoping to finally dedicate time to my painting, but Frank's surveillance only intensified over the years. I realized that growing old with him meant becoming even more invisible as a person, valued more as a trophy wife. "A woman your age should conduct herself with dignity" became a common phrase whenever I tried to regain any autonomy. But something shifted within me when I turned 68. Maybe it was the birth of my granddaughter Lily, John's daughter, that sparked memories of the carefree girl I once was. Or perhaps it was the chance encounter with Ashley, a former student who had become an investigative journalist and looked at me with genuine admiration for who I was, not what I represented. The fact is, I began to see my life through different eyes, questioning the gilded cage I had helped build. What no one knew was that behind the facade of the perfect wife and devoted grandmother, I cultivated an insatiable desire for freedom, a desire that had lain dormant for decades but had never completely died. And while Frank toasted my value as the jewel of his empire that night at the Waldorf Astoria, I was already planting the first seeds of my liberation. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was winding down in Midtown Manhattan when Frank entered our suite holding a velvet box, a Tiffany's green. His eyes gleamed with that mixture of pride and power that I knew so well. "Do you like it, dear?" he asked, adjusting the clasp of the emerald necklace behind my neck, already etched with the lines of time. The stones were the size of cherries, heavy and cold against my skin. "It's stunning," I replied, admiring the reflection in the mirror. But something bothered me about the weight, the shape of the clasp. 3 days later, while Frank was in a board meeting, I received an unexpected visit from Pete, an old electronics technician who had worked for our family for years. He asked to see the necklace, examining it with a magnifying glass and tiny tools. "Mrs. Bennett," he whispered, "there's a tracking microchip embedded in here, the kind that tracks location in real time." My hand trembled as I touched the clasp. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was control in its purest form, disguised as a loving gift. "Can you remove it?" I asked. Pete hesitated. "I can, but he'll know." At that moment, I decided to keep it. I needed to understand the extent of Frank's surveillance. The answer came faster than I expected. A few days later, my credit cards failed at the CVS, where I buy medication for arthritis. I called Frank, who resolved the issue with a phone call, not without questioning. "Why were you at the CVS on 5th Avenue and not the one on our corner?" My studio, my refuge for painting watercolors since retirement, was locked with a temporary password one morning. "Security measure," Frank explained. "There have been art heists in the neighborhood." The protective care revealed itself as constant surveillance. At night, lying next to him, I heard the slight creak of the walking stick that Frank leaned against the bed, a souvenir of a horse-riding accident in his youth that left him full of fears that he now projected onto me. The final straw came when I found my cell phone reset. The photos of my paintings, the numbers of my friends, everything erased. "Must have been a virus," Frank commented casually. "I hired a digital security specialist for your new phone." It was at that moment that I realized I was property, not a partner, an extension of Frank Bennett's empire, kept under control like his bank accounts and investments. The woman who once painted dogwoods in spring and dreamed of exhibiting at the MoMA was trapped in an invisible cage, but as real as the wrought iron gates of the mansions in Beverly Hills. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling of the bedroom while formulating for the first time in decades the question that would change everything. Who would Elizabeth Bennet be without Frank Bennett? The question I asked myself that night triggered an avalanche of painful perceptions. Like a veil tearing, I began to see the invisible chains that bound me. Frank increased the surveillance as he sensed my unrest. My new phone came with family location permanently activated. The driver, Dave, accompanied me even to buy groceries. My friends received cordial calls from Frank when our meetings exceeded 2 hours. On a Friday night, during a pot roast dinner at her mother-in-law, Carol's, she served up some strong coffee and said bluntly, "Your father-in-law wanted to control everything, just like Richard does." Her trembling hands betrayed that the compliment was, in reality, a warning. On the drive back, the driver, Mike, confided while stuck in traffic on the 405, "Mrs. Jones, the doctor pays me to send him your location, but you treat us like people. I can't do it anymore." The exhaustion etched on his face made me realize I wasn't alone in this suffocating web. The nights became long vigils. I pretended to sleep while Richard checked my phone, reviewed credit card statements, and planned my activities for the next day. My body protested. My arthritis flared up. Constant headaches started. My blood pressure fluctuated. "It's your age," said the family doctor, a close friend of Richard's. He prescribed more medication, more rest, less excitement. My world shrank. The art studio remained closed under the pretense of renovations. My paints were removed because the smell could worsen your blood pressure, dear. My books were filtered. Romances deemed too stimulating mysteriously disappeared from the shelves. The house housekeeper, Helen, received orders to serve me only foods approved by the nutritionist without my knowledge or consent. My son, Tim, visited once a week, always repeating, "Dad just wants what's best for you, Mom. You're not as young as you used to be." My granddaughter, Lily, was the only one who noticed my silent suffering, asking with her insightful 17-year-old mind, "Grandma, why are you always so sad?" The afternoons dragged on in the spacious living room overlooking the Pacific. I watched people on the beach, free, moving with the rhythm of the waves. Memories of my youth flooded back, the classes I taught, the students I inspired, the canvases I painted, the life I had before becoming just an accessory to Richard. One of those afternoons I found an old photo album hidden at the back of the closet. Flipping through it, I recognized the woman with a lively gaze and defiant posture that I once was. A tear fell on the photo from my graduation, slightly blurring the image of that Elizabeth who believed in the future. "Where did you lose yourself?" I asked my younger reflection, without expecting an answer. But something inside me, perhaps that same Elizabeth, was beginning to awaken, to demand room to breathe again. I hid the album under the mattress like forbidden treasure. That spark of remembrance of who I was gave me courage for a small act of rebellion. I called Lily without telling Richard. "Grandma, is everything okay?" The concern in my granddaughter's voice highlighted how rare my calls had become. "I need your help with something technological," I said, not knowing exactly how to ask. "Could you come over when your grandfather is out?" The next afternoon, Lily arrived with her college backpack. While Richard was at a business lunch, she taught me how to use apps that left no trace, set up a secret email account, and gave me a small tablet that I could easily hide. "Grandma, this isn't healthy," she commented, noticing the discreet cameras in the corners of the room. "You need to talk to someone about Grandpa." I nodded in agreement, but who would listen to a 68-year-old woman complaining about her husband? Society sees us as grumpy, imaginative, dramatic. Richard was respected, powerful, charming in public. It was Lily who introduced me to the journalist, Sarah, her professor at the Communications College. "She researches psychological control in relationships," my granddaughter explained, "and she keeps everything anonymous." Our first meeting took place at the Museum of Modern Art Cafe, under the guise of me visiting an exhibition. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with a penetrating gaze, listened to my story without judgment. "Mrs. Jones, what you're describing has a name. It's coercive control. It's a frequent form of abuse against older women." Abuse. The word weighed like lead. I had never thought that what I was living could be called that. There were no shouts, no physical violence, just those invisible chains that suffocated me day after day. "And what can I do?" I asked, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. "Start to reclaim your voice," replied Sarah. "Literally, with her support and my granddaughter Lily, who edits videos better than any professional, I launched the podcast Silver Voices, recorded in the linen closet to muffle the sound. Anonymous older women narrated routines of control and silencing, and each story went on air, interspersed with old blues music that evoked the early days of radio. Sarah advised, "Save every raw audio file. Testimony is gold." My voice, digitally disguised, was just another one in the crowd, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I was telling my story, even if no one knew it was me. The podcast gained listeners quickly. Elderly women started to relate, to share their own stories. An invisible community was forming in the shadows of New York City, united by experiences similar to mine. Ironically, it was Richard who showed me an article about the podcast on his tablet. "Look at this nonsense, Barbara. Old ladies making up stories for attention, as if someone like me would ever do anything to cause this." I smiled, agreeing silently, while I felt something I had forgotten grow within me. Dignity. A small light flickered at the end of the dark tunnel I was living in. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was hope. My little rebellion lasted exactly 17 days. On the 18th, I found my secret tablet on the dining table, next to Richard's plate. His eyes didn't meet mine during the entire breakfast, until he finally said in a controlled voice, "Barbara, I discovered your little project. I'm disappointed." The blood ran cold in my veins. The words caught in my throat. "I thought we trusted each other, and I find out my own wife is sneaking around, talking trash about me. Richard, I never mentioned your name on the podcast." I tried to argue, my trembling hands holding my coffee cup. "Don't be naive. Everyone's going to associate these stories with our family. Do you have any idea the damage this could do to my business, to the reputation I have built for decades?" That same day, Richard took action. My cell phone was changed again. The house's internet access was restricted. Mary received a call informing her that she was temporarily unable to visit me alone. Something about about protecting my mental health, Carol was subtly threatened with a lawsuit for negatively influencing a vulnerable senior. In the fall, dry, leaves-covered Central Park, rummaging through a leather trunk stored since the 1970s, the smell of mold made me cough and unleashed a flood of memories. I found a contract revealing that my grandfather, a former farmer from upstate New York, had financed Richard's first import company, demanding transparency that was never delivered. If that came to light, the myth of the self-made man would crumble like a cheap suit in a downpour. I kept the document with me, not yet knowing what I would do with it. It was a powerful weapon, but I hesitated to use it. Richard intensified his control. A nurse began to keep me company during the day. In reality, a spy hired to monitor my every move. My medications for blood pressure and arthritis were administered personally by her at strict times. "It's for your own good, dear," Richard repeated, kissing my forehead as if I were a sick child. "You were wearing yourself out with those sad stories." I discovered the reason for Richard's obsession one night when he thought I was asleep. He was on the phone talking about the bankruptcy that almost swallowed his father in the 80s, promising never to repeat the fiasco. I understood that control was armor against fear, but that fear didn't justify taking my freedom away. My prison became even more suffocating when Richard announced a renovation in our penthouse, which consisted of removing my studio to create a health room, a private office where doctors could examine me without me having to leave the house. Michael, my son, came to visit me with his wife. While she distracted Richard in the living room, he whispered, "Mom, are you okay?" Mary's worried. I wanted to scream that no, nothing was okay. But the years of silence had silenced me, even in the face of that opportunity. I just smiled and said that everything was fine, that Richard was taking good care of me. My own son left convinced that his daughter's concerns were teenage exaggerations. That night, contemplating the starry sky through the living room window, I realized that the small light of hope I had found was about to go out. I needed to do something drastic, or I would end my days like a porcelain doll on a shelf, beautiful, preserved, and completely lifeless. I decided to act when I realized that my fingers no longer responded as before, not due to age, but due to lack of use. My hands, once skilled with brushes, trembled when holding a cup. Life was literally slipping through my fingers. With the cold of January nipping at my knees, Richard tried to polish his own image and named me ambassador of the Sundance Film Festival. I accepted immediately. To his surprise, it was my chance. "I'm glad you're feeling better," he commented, kissing my forehead. "We'll just limit your exposure. Quick appearances, controlled interviews." "Of course, dear," I replied with the docility he expected. On the first day of the festival, I wore a navy blue suit I'd picked out myself. A small victory I silently celebrated. Richard had to deal with a business emergency and ended up leaving me in the care of Walter, the driver, with strict instructions. That's when Carol showed up, press badge around her neck, a determined look in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, I have 5 minutes before they notice. I brought this for you." It was a simple prepaid cell phone, the kind teenagers wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I slipped it into my purse without asking any questions. "There's an emergency plan on the only contact listed. And one more thing, your interview for the Hollywood Memories program has been approved." Without Richard, when I mentioned the interview to Richard that night, he hesitated. It was too much prestige to refuse. "I'll come with you, of course. The format is individual," I explained. "Short, edited segments about my experience with art and film in schools." Against his will, Richard relented. "Walter will wait outside the studio." Never had an interview been so liberating. I talked about film, art, education. The cameras captured a Beatrice I didn't even recognize anymore. Passionate, eloquent, alive. At the end, when the microphones were turned off, the producer commented, "You should have your own show." That spark ignited something in me. On the Smith Foundation's social media, I started showcasing stories of female entrepreneurs from the South Bronx. The videos went viral and attracted a Swiss investor willing to donate as long as the accounts were audited. A misplaced zero on the balance sheets triggered the auditor's warning. "We're digging into everything, come rain or shine." Richard panicked. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Desperate, he offered me the symbolic presidency of the foundation. "You can't handle this pressure," he taunted. Despite the aches in my hips, I raised my head. "Try me." The next day, I used the secret cell phone to call Jennifer. My granddaughter cried when she heard my plans. "Grandma, he's going to go crazy." "He already has, sweetheart. Now it's my turn to live." I convened a council of community leaders with the legendary Mrs. Johnson, 72 years old, and a voice that doesn't tremble, opening overseeing the meeting. Good money is money that serves people. The press loved it. The stocks went up, but the council unearthed a clause that allowed the president to be removed for inappropriate conduct. The gear meshed like a drumbeat in perfect rhythm. My makeshift office at the foundation became my new studio. There, between spreadsheets and social reports, I rediscovered my talent for creating. I no longer just painted canvases, but projects that transformed lives. Carol, now my official advisor, organized my public appearances strategically. Richard watched from a distance, torn between rage and admiration. It was too late to reverse the process. I had become a symbol of renewal for the foundation, and any move against me would damage the image he cherished. For the first time in our marriage, I had power. Power is a double-edged sword, I quickly discovered. While my influence grew at the foundation, Richard maneuvered behind the scenes. Before the council vote, lawyers tried to shield Richard with a last-minute addendum. I entered the marble room carrying a yellowed envelope, the stamped copy of the original bylaws, rescued with the help of the retired clerk, Mr. Peterson, a loyal podcast listener. Old document trumps fresh addendum, I declared. Silence. Just the nervous clicking of pens. Guilt, however, weighed on me. Removing Richard would threaten the jobs of 8,000 families. I saw this firsthand when visiting factories in Queens. Workers showed rent receipts dependent on punctual wages. It worsened when Richard, frail in a stuffy dressing room at Carnegie Hall, asked for help to protect Jennifer, whom he saw as the only chance to break the family cycle. My heart pounded between justice and destruction. My liberation brought unexpected consequences. Robert stopped visiting, siding with his father. Friends of decades chose sides, many preferring to maintain their social positions than support my independence. I discovered the meaning of starting over at 68, when the world expects you to just wait for the end to come. In September, the auditor's final report confirmed that funds were financing ghost projects. I published everything uncensored and launched the Thrive program, micro-loans for elderly women to start businesses. Traditional sponsors fled. Social impact startups came in, demanding Richard out of the board. The council voted suspension indefinitely. The accounts, however, were in the red. To cover payroll, I announced the auction of the Grand, a yacht that was a fixture in the Hamptons. The day before, a storm knocked out power, and the online bidding site crashed. Sabotage seemed likely. Carol streamed everything live on her phone, soaked to the bone, while Steve scrambled to set up an emergency hotspot. Bidding reopened just under the wire, and the yacht went for double the minimum bid, securing the funds and turning the empty. Ballrooms of mansions into community sewing workshops. My art became a bridge. Painting Vermont maple trees in the fall, I created canvases auctioned off to fund a senior dance program in Harlem and to create prints for fabrics that seamstresses in the Bronx transformed into dresses. The community runway show in Times Square showcased the fusion of my brushstrokes with needles wielded by women starting over in their 60s and beyond. Beatrice revolutionizes New York philanthropy, declared the New York Times. They didn't mention the personal cost I paid. My knees ached more than ever. Sleepless nights left dark circles under my eyes, and doctors recommended rest I couldn't afford. Between meetings and events, I moved to my own condo in the Upper West Side. Smaller, cozier, no cameras lurking in the corners. There, alone for the first time in 4 decades, I discovered the bitter and sweet taste of independence. Loneliness sometimes weighed heavily on rainy nights when the pain in my joints screamed louder than the satisfaction of my daily achievements. Ashley started sleeping over on Fridays. "Grandma, I've never seen you so tired and so happy at the same time," she commented while helping me organize my medications. The marathon left me hoarse, my knees throbbing, but proud. On my podcast, now openly hosted by me, I released a raw audio recording of my former accountant admitting to fraud. It went viral and toppled Richard's last legal defense. Women who once greeted me with formal kisses at galas now sought me out to confide in me about stories similar to my own. I became, without realizing it, a voice for a generation of women who had aged under the yoke of unequal relationships. Women who were beginning to question if there was still time to rewrite their stories. "There's always time," I replied to Eleanor, 74, who asked if it was too late to learn photography. "The time we have left is the most precious of all." Those words for Eleanor echoed in my own life as a mantra in the months that followed. The precious time brought unexpected transformations. Ryan, my son, showed up at my door on a rainy afternoon in April, soaked not only by the storm. "Mom," he said, his voice thick sick with emotion. Ashley showed me your projects, made me listen to the podcasts. I didn't know, or maybe I didn't want to see. I hugged my son tightly, feeling his body tremble against mine. Forgiveness doesn't always need words. A week before the 4th of July, fireworks were lighting up the sky when Richard knocked on the door of my office, a renovated brownstone in Greenwich Village, full of antique tile. He was wearing a plain, unbranded shirt. "I brought these proposals," he said, showing me folders for recycling initiatives for fishing communities in Long Island. I negotiated. He would stay in the background, a symbolic salary, every penny audited online. He agreed not only to save his fortune, but so that Ashley would see a different man in the mirror. "What happened to us, Bea?" Richard asked one afternoon, as we reviewed spreadsheets side by side, now as colleagues, no longer husband and wife. "Life happened, Richard, and we forgot to grow together." The months turned into a year, then 2. The Bloom program flourished, generating income for more than 300 women over 60. My studio on the Upper West Side became a gathering place for artists of all ages. The pain in my knees persisted, but now they were honorable scars from battles worth fighting. Richard and I found a new equilibrium. We didn't move back in together. Some bridges, once broken, cannot be rebuilt in the same way. But we developed a mutual respect that was perhaps more genuine than the love we once thought we had. On the night that closed the cycle, the Rainbow Room traded its chandeliers for arrangements of sunflowers and a jazz trio. I wore raw linen, reading glasses hanging on a cord, and smelled the scent of orange blossoms mixed with the city air. I announced that 100 artisans over 60 were embroidering memories onto dresses printed with my canvases. The audience, everyday people and the old elite mixed together, applauded, standing. Richard, in a more modest suit, smiled subtly. He understood that true empires serve, they don't oppress. Today at 71, I look back with the clarity that only time provides. I don't regret the years I spent with Richard. They gave me Michael and Emily. They forged the woman I am today. But I also don't regret finding my voice, even if it was late. In the game, New York City was part of everything. The coffee shop on the corner where Tony got his start. The bar in Greenwich Village where Susan got a tip from a remorseful accountant. The gospel choir in Harlem that gave strength to the seamstresses. The city shortens distances with 2 hugs and a cheerful good morning. I carry with me 3 traits I wouldn't trade. Empathy that builds bridges, an attentive gaze that hears silences, and stubbornness that blossoms under pressure. I gained autonomy, but I pay prices. Memories sunk with the old brownstone, exposure that steals peace, and Emily's tears when she asks why Grandpa doesn't live with us anymore. Still, I cross the avenue, illuminated by the certainty that no one dictates how brightly a senior citizen can shine. At the last foundation meeting, Richard handed me a small package. Inside, I found the emerald necklace, now without the tracker. "To remember that some beautiful things can be redeemed," he said. I accepted the gift not as a symbol of possession, but as a mark of a shared journey. Today, the necklace rests in a velvet box, along with my memories. I prefer the light weight of the brushes in my hands, the freedom to choose my own paths, the pleasure of seeing my granddaughter following hers, with the certainty that a woman's worth is never measured by the jewels she wears, but by the marks she leaves on the world. As trumpets announce another parade, I see my reflection in the shop window, a silver-haired lady, author of her own story, surrounded by people who have discovered that loving, sometimes, is letting go.